Hey guys, it's Brian, and now is time for my second live stream. I wanted to talk today about some stuff that has been on my mind. Um, First, I'd like to go over some news. Obviously, coronavirus has dominated the news cycle, um, and it has negatively affected uh, several political people, which, when you ignore science and you ignore what people feel about the science that is being said or stated, people are going to tend to turn their backs on you. Um, it's just crazy that I talked about this a couple weeks ago. Almost, I guess it's been over a month now, but about how people's lack of caution when it came to reopening was going to lead to another shutdown. And here we are. We here in California, especially, have gotten to the point where we are, uh, everything is shut down again. I mean, yeah, you can get food taken out, and I'm sure this shutdown will be a lot different than the first shutdown. I mean, they're not going to shut down. I don't think they'll shut down restaurants completely like they did before, but it's going to negatively affect the job market. It's going to negatively affect the economy. It's going to negatively affect people's mental health. I mean, you hear people of where they can't handle social distancing, they can't handle physical distancing, and it's because we're social people and we want to be near people we feel good about or we care about. Um, and that has become the main tipping point for why people don't want to stay shut. Um, it's not talked about in the news. It's not talked about really anywhere that I've seen. But when it comes to that, if you're not around people you like, even for short periods of time, um, it negatively affects you because your ego isn't being satisfied by human contact. Um, and that's a difficult, um, that's just a difficult situation to be in when you're used to being loved or cared for or just being paid attention to um, for long periods of time, and suddenly no one is doing that. It affects you negatively because you really have no recourse unless you live with someone or you are around people, um, aren't you're around people that you really care about and want to be around. A lot of us, unfortunately, aren't. And I hate to say it that way, but your family or whoever you're with has to be a very strong, there has to be a very strong connection where you share a lot of things that you enjoy. And if you don't have that, and you say you're in a roommate situation and you live separate lives, your roommate goes and works somewhere else or goes to school or whatever, and you do something completely different, so you just have those random interactions um, in those in between times when you're both at home. But if you're in a roommate situation and you've been isolated with these people, you realize how much you fucking hate them. Plain and simple. And it's like that with everyone you have a relationship with. And you can say, well, no, it doesn't, or whatever, but you're lying to yourself, because how you feel about someone really comes out when you're around them all the time. And I hate to say it that way, but it's true. If you, it, anyway, so, but it's, so we're back to being shut down. The government has this quixotic idea that we can send kids back to school and they won't get sick, because it transmits less well in younger people. But what they're missing and not paying attention to is that part of the reason the virus spread so quickly in the US in the first place is a lot of people that had it didn't have symptoms. And so what are we talking about here? Are these people, are kids just going to be guinea pigs to be transmission, to be carriers for the disease so everyone else can get sick? I mean, that's silly. It's dangerous. It's unacceptable on a massive level. And so we sacrifice ourselves for our kids like we always do, except that now the timeline is a couple of years, maybe, instead of 3 decades. That's dumb. I'm sorry, but it is. If you are willing, if you're saying, okay, my kids have to go to school so I can go back to work, well, what if your job doesn't come back? What if, like, as an example, you work in the airline industry and your job ends on September 30th because your airline can't afford to pay you? And every major airline in the United States has said, we're cutting half our workforce after September 30th. The only reason we haven't done so yet is because the CARES Act, which was the original stimulus, prevented us from doing so. And you know, we've had a rebound in employment where restaurants have hired back people who they laid off. And if you're laid off, you're counted as unemployed in our country. So the job market has rebounded some, but how many people are still out of work? How many people are going to continue to be out of work? I mean, it doesn't make sense for us to be celebrating reopening when there's less money to be spent or that will be spent. The people, I have a special place in my heart for people who make tips. When I worked, I did mostly tip making jobs. And because of that, I understand what it takes to be in a job like that. You do it for the love. You don't do it for the money, although some people do, and they're bad at it. And that's just simply the truth. You just want, if you show that you care about your customer's experience, you will very much be rewarded at the end of their time with you, rather than well, I didn't get a tip because I blah blah blah. It doesn't matter. If you don't take an interest in if you work for tips and you don't take an interest in your customers' well-being or their experience, they're not going to reward you. I mean, we've gotten to a place, I mean, here in California, it's you tip ahead of time, and that's, I mean, you really kind of have to earn a tip. Now, if you're a barista in a coffee shop, then yeah, if you're going to tip. But when it comes to that, how happy you make your customer is going to directly affect your tips. But now a lot of those are gone because people don't make as much. And when it comes to the economic correction, the economy has gained X amount of percent since the bottom, but in context to where it was, we're at about zero or less from where it was. Yeah, the economy went to X and now it's gained 40%, but the 40% it gained is equal to the 25% it lost before we gained it back. And that is something you should think about. That means, and the stock market has, this is important, the stock market has no bearing on whether you or I can spend $5 on a coffee, or whether um, we can afford to put gas in our car, or whatever. Um, and that is where we need to be thinking. We shouldn't be thinking about, well, is the stock market going to make us rich again? It's not, unless you have have a couple $1,000,000 you can invest in the stock market. And to be honest, even then, unless you bought at the bottom, which was at the beginning of April, you aren't going to make anything unless you bought gold prior to everything going to hell. It used to be all commodities during down markets were a lot more profitable than stocks when stocks tanked. But oil proved that's not the case, because if people aren't really driving, there's no demand for oil, which means you've got countries like China having massive super tankers of oil just floating in the South China Sea, so that they have oil if it's needed, because they bought it at a negative. They bought it at a negative price. Because they own the tanker, they were paid to store that oil. That's something to think about. So anyway, I'm going to, like I said, I try to keep these between 10 and 15 minutes. And so I'm going to end here. For those of you jealous of where I am, just think about where I've been for the last few years, and know that I'll be here a few more months. Anyway, it's good. I hope everyone is doing well, and I will see you later.